Hello my debaucherous darlings, and welcome back to the Goth Detect. So the last few weeks have been so busy and crazy, and I thought this week it would be nice to do some chill, laid-back DIY craft time fun. I am an obsessive plant parent. I absolutely love having plants all around the house, and it's gotten a little bit out of control at this point. Having plants in my home brings me so much joy, especially in the dark winter months that we have here in New England. And so I have a fun project for my plant children. So I have these really plain, boring, just nothing too exciting or special plant pots. And my plan is to turn them into cute little disco ball inspired lights to hold my plant children. I ended up getting these disco ball mirror squares. They have an adhesive back, so it's super easy to use them. You can get these for a lot of different types of crafts and different sizes. And my plan is to just stick it onto the plant pots. They're really good for this sort of craft, so this should be pretty simple. I went ahead and did a test on the smallest plant pot, and I ended up learning a lot of things in this process. I think this is a really good thing to do when you're taking on a project, especially because I have multiple of these that I want to do, and so I tend to try to do one fully so I can see if there's anything that I can learn from the process. In this case, there were two big things that I learned. The first was when I started, I was putting the mirror adhesive material running this way along the pot. And what I noticed was happening was I was getting these kind of gaps in the material where the little mirror squares were too large to fit an extra mirror to cover there. And these are really small. I do have little glass cutters, but it's just so small I didn't want to be fussing around with a glass cutter to try to get this to work. And so what I think I'm going to do for the next one is, instead of running the mirrors this way, I'm going to attach them going this way, because then the vertical lines are running up and down, and I think that's going to be easier to control and make it look more consistent. The other thing that I learned is when I started, the adhesive sheets come with multiples of the mirrors all attached in a single line, and I started with using the larger sections on the top of the pot, and what I was realizing is it became really obvious where the seams on each of the levels were, and so towards the bottom I started using only single rows of mirror at a time. And it is going to take a little bit longer to do it this way, but I think it's much easier to control how it's going to look by doing it a single run of mirror at a time. I think there's something really great about the disco ball aesthetic, and the chaoticness of it makes it so that you're very focused on the scale of the object rather than the teeny tiny parts. And so even when there are inconsistencies in the mirror, you don't really tend to notice that, because when you look at it from far away, it's just really captivating to look at. And I think this is going to be a really fun way to liven up my room. I think this is going to be a really fun, cozy craft, and so I'm not super worried about how much longer it's going to take. This is just going to be a fun night in, just doing a interesting little craft project for my plants. So I have my obligatory bisexual hot and cold drinks, and I'm going to put on my favorite binge watching show, and I'm just going to putter away at this. So a few safety notes that I want to go over with everybody to make sure everybody's being smart and safe. The first thing is these tiny mirrors are glass, and so you want to be really careful not to cut yourself. I did manage to nick myself a little bit. No.
I broke it. It burned my hand, so I punched it.
Just want to be aware, you can totally wear gloves if that's something that makes you feel more comfortable. So much danger glitter. Another thing is you want to be really careful every time you're using any sort of bladed tool, like the X-Acto blade that I'm using for this project. You want to make sure that you're going really slow and doing slow, shallow cuts. You don't want to dig in because that's going to increase the likelihood that you're going to end up hurting yourself. Another important note about any bladed tool, and this I think is often counterintuitive to what people actually think when they think about bladed tools, is that a sharp knife is a safe knife. And this is something that I think people don't realize, but when your blade of your tool is dull, it's far more likely to skip and jump and do things that are unpredictable. So make sure that you're changing the blades often and keep yourself safe. So the second pot came out much better than the first in terms of overall spacing and making sure that there was a lot less dead space in the pot. Something that was happening was as I was going across the pot in this up and down pattern, because of the curve of the pot, I was starting to get this slow curving effect on the mirror, which I think is creating an interesting pattern, and I don't mind it, but I think for the rest of the pots, I'm going to go back and do the mirrors running this way, but keeping it to a single line because I think it's going to be easy to keep everything consistent all the way down the pot that way. This is a super easy material to play around with, and I think it's really fun. So if this is something you're thinking about trying on, comment below because I would love to know what kind of thing that you would put disco ball mirror on. So now it's time to get the rest of these pods discoed up. So I think I figured out a good way to get this to look consistent. As I'm wrapping, sometimes you end up with rows like this where the distance is too small to fit another block. And so what I do is I just pop out one mirror at a time and I just kind of scooch them slightly closer. So I'm increasing the gap between each of the mirrors slowly for like 4 or 5 back to make this amount be less noticeable in between every mirror. So give me 1 second and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
2,000 years later.
So you can see I've gone through and each of these little spots that I've added in is now what was that much bigger gap. And so now it's way less noticeable that there's a gap. I just increased the last 5 or 6 just slightly because the mirrors come extremely close together. And so just adding a tiny bit of gap hides that really well and makes it look a lot cleaner. So the pots have been disco-fied, and what I made sure to do was I left a gap at the top of the pot on either side to make sure I had room to drill holes into the plastic pots. This way I could hang the pots. I ended up using a mixture of chain and jump ring to do this, but you could really use anything from cord or fishing line, whatever you really wanted to hang the pots with, you totally could. I also ended up using command hooks to hang them from the ceiling. It makes it so it's a really useful renter-friendly trick, but you could also just use screw hooks if you are in a situation where that's okay. So from the very beginning, I knew that I wanted to add a light component to this project, and I ended up getting these really cool LED orbs. They run on a remote, which is really neat, and they're meant to go and float in pools and hot tubs and things like that, but I'm just gonna stick them in the pot. And I think this is a really fun example of sometimes in a project there are just happy accidents. I ended up putting them inside the pot and quickly realized that the pot was so translucent that you could still see the light through the pot even with the mirrors on them. And so the light was coming through the cracks around the mirrors. And I think it's a really neat effect, and I'm really excited to use this in this project. Because they're meant for pools and hot tubs and things like that, they are waterproof. And I think you're probably wondering, well, if you're putting a light inside of the pot, how are you going to add the soil and put the plants? And I am going to show you that, but I will say, because these are waterproof, I think you probably could just put soil in the pots and stick this inside with the plants and it would totally be fine. but I am going to show you guys a different setup that I do when I'm propagating my plants. So this is my propagation station. I have a couple of these. They're essentially little test tubes and the plastic holder for them. I really love this technique for propagating my plants, particularly my vining plants especially. It allows me to propagate a single vine portion at a time, which I've noticed increases the likelihood of success because each vine has its own water source and it's far easier to keep everything clean and watch what's going on. It also helps me keep track of what's going on with the root system, and so I can see very clearly when they're ready to be repotted. When it's time to repot them, basically what I do is I take the test tube and I drill a couple holes in the bottom, and this is because I tend to bottom water a lot of my vining plants. It's a much easier method for dealing with this sort of plant, and overall I think bottom watering is a good technique for a lot of plants. It minimizes bugs that can happen because of overwatering, and I just find it can be really easy to do this. And I like the test tube method because it essentially creates these little plugs of each plant having its own little test tube of soil, and I'm just able to keep an eye on it. And then when the root system is mature enough, I take them out and I put them into an actual pot. And I find that it keeps the root system really robust through this growing process when they're still early in propagating. So this is essentially what the setup ends up looking like when they're still in this early propagation stage. When it gets to a point where I've noticed that the roots have grown enough, I'll take them out and put them into a big pot so they're able to continue to grow and get bigger. I really love vining plants in particular. They're so easy to take care of and they're really easy to continually propagate, which I love filling my home with plants, and so it's nice when your plants just give you more plants constantly. And so if you're getting into plants, or even if you already do a ton with plants, these two in particular are the two that I would recommend. Pothos is a really, really great and easy plant to take care of. They don't require much sunlight. You can basically put them in a really shadowy area of your home, or they can be right in the window, and they do well either way. And they come in a lot of really fun colors and variegations, which I love. And then this is a Zebrina plant, and I also love this one. It's, again, pretty similar on the ease of taking care of. They're not too fussy, and they are so pretty. They have this like beautiful purple silver variegation on them. And so these are two great starter plants. They are really hard to kill, and I think anybody could get into plants if you start with the right plants from the get-go. So I'm gonna get all of the plants that are ready to move from the propagation station into the test tube soil, and then we're going to style the disco pots and get everything set up for the final result. This was such a simple project, and it's amazing how you can take a really easy, simple craft and use it to elevate your space and make it really unique and special to you. The hallway has always been this point of contention in my space. It just feels like huge dead area, and it's never felt really inspiring, but it is the hub of circulation in my home, and so I pass through it constantly. And now I'm really excited that I have this beautiful wall of adorable plants and fun LEDs that can bring me joy every time I'm in this space. I really appreciate you lovelies coming along on the ride as I do a fun little craft this week. If you enjoyed yourself, I would love it if you would consider subscribing and click the notification bell so you get notified every time we're doing more creative plant DIY nonsense here at the Goth Attack. And if you want to support the channel even further, consider checking out our Patreon. We have this really great after show called the Mortem, where I go into more detail about the ins and outs of the project and things that didn't end up making it into this video. It's an awesome way to support the channel, and it ensures that we get to make awesome content for you lovelies. This has been wonderful, my darlings. Until next time, be creative, live fully, and memento mori.